Welcome back, New Life, to NL Nuggets of Information. My name is Isaiah. I'm the video director here at New Life. And today we are joined by none other than Pastor or Dr. Brian Jenkins.
Hello.
So Brian, today we have been tasked to talk about one of our favorite topics, which is the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien as kind of a whole. And specifically figuring out, what themes, Christian themes, are developed within the books of the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. It's exciting. It's a great subject because it's there. It's undeniably there. So for sure.
Yeah. No, and I think, I think the biggest one would be the ring itself, the One Ring. It resembles sin. It's the burden of sin. And so when Frodo takes his journey from the Shire all the way to Mount Doom, you kind of see it progressively, it's that burden, it's that weight that sin has on you. And even after the fact, spoiler alert, when he gets to Mount Doom and he drops it in the volcano and he destroys the ring, it doesn't just, the effects of everything that he's had to endure up until that moment don't just vanish. There's repercussions and there's certain things that happen because of the ring that's not fully dealt with and not fully healed until he goes to the Grey Havens, which in Tolkien's world are basically our heaven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of that is how Tolkien that ring is the sin that's in the ring is so much symbolized with power and the idea of control and power and domination over another person. So it's only like the truly humble and simple that can kind of deal with it. So that's why Bilbo can carry it for so long. That's why Frodo can actually carry it for so long, because they're not affected by the power of this world or in terms of the seeking of power. So they're not as tempted by the ring. And I think that's one of my favorite themes, is the idea of what Tolkien calls a simple life, the joy of a simple life, of good till birth, in the first chapter when he talks about an introduction to hobbits. And so he has that idea of humility and simplicity as the way to combat the temptation of power, the temptation of evil, and not the pursuit of power, trying to beat it, but rather just sort of dismissing it. So I think that's a cool theme as well.
Yeah. Well, and my introduction to the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien as a whole was obviously the films that came out. And so and I've read the books all once. They're not the best in my memory, but I've read all the books once. But just basing off the what I know, even at the end, when they get to Mount Doom and when Frodo has that chance to destroy the ring, that temptation finally gets a hold of Frodo. And because of that, Samwise was the one who really was not, he didn't have to carry that ring and the temptation, the burden of it. But even Frodo at the end, fell into that temptation. And it wasn't until Samwise came in. You could argue Gollum, but...
I think the Gollum thing's interesting because if you remember the exchange between Frodo and Gandalf about him sort of wishing someone had killed Gandalf, Frodo sort of out loud says, something to the effect of, I wish Bilbo would have killed Gollum when he had the chance.
Yep.
And Gandalf stops him and he says, who are you to decide who lives and dies? And he says, Gollum may still serve some purpose yet. And that's actually a massive theme in Tolkien. If you go all the way back for you deep cut fans to the Silmarillion, when the concept of evil is first introduced into the world of Arda, the world of Middle Earth, the creator god, Eru Iluvatar, is constantly taking the dark tones that are being literally sung into creation and bending them into his harmony. So Tolkien is actually sharing this huge idea of, even in the midst of tragedy and struggle and all this sort of stuff, the sovereign will of God will still prevail. And Gollum surviving and then actually being a part of the destruction of the ring is actually a full circle image of that, which is very cool, I think.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think in many ways too, like with Tolkien and all of his work with Middle Earth, it's kind of I think what makes it so good, because it's been around for generations now, right? And I think very few things can survive this long. and be just as popular as it was when it first came out. When he wrote The Hobbit in 1930s, then when he wrote Lord of the Rings in the 50s, I believe it was. I mean, the fact that it's 2022 and, you know, they're still making,
people are still making money off of it.
Ecosystem, they're making money, you know, all that stuff. I think it is because there is such a rich and deep meaning to a lot of things. It's not just your typical, you know, flat line fantasy. There's a ton of meaning, and Tolkien crafted all that so meticulously and so methodically. And this is just a piece of it, right?
Yeah. And I absolutely agree with you. I think part of that is because we were talking this a little bit before. I think part of it is because his own Christian devotion, he's a very devout Catholic man, his own Christian and devotion spilled into it. You know, people, there's always a big sort of, is it overt? Is it sort of subtle? What is it as compared to C.S. Lewis? I mean, C.S. Lewis was much more overt. And so sometimes C.S. Lewis's Christian imagery is almost so heavy-handed, whereas Tolkien's is so subtle because it was just natural for him. He was such a strong and devout man in terms of his faith. It was such a natural thing for him to include it, as he was essentially creating his own mythology, but he couldn't separate it from the reality, what he called the true myth. It's the only myth that's true, is how he talked about Christianity. And so he naturally wove it in there. And I think because of that, that's why its themes are so enduring.
Yeah.
Because it taps into the same themes that faith in general speaks to us. Friendship, community, loss, suffering, destiny, eternity, why we are the way we are. How can we transcend our limitation and achieve something greater? When you get into that, the legend of that, and for Tolkien, he was just sort of saying, what if Christianity sort of happened someplace else in a fantasy world? What would that look like to a certain extent? And it just pours through it, which is awesome.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's why we love it.
That's why we love it. I mean, and fuzzy feet and pointed ears, and whether or not the Balrog actually has wings.
There you go.
Yeah.
All the great fandom.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's got one of the best fandoms for sure. So
it does. So cool. Well, there you go, guys. Thank you for joining us again for another episode of NL Nuggets of Information. We'll see you next time.